How do? My name is Andrew Hancock and I am a VMware technical architect from Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. I have worked with VMware since their birth in 1998, so that has been over 24 years I have been working with the VMware product catalogue. Some of my close colleagues say if you cut Andy in half, it reads VMware like a stick of rock from Blackpool. I have now written 134 articles and recorded 30 hours of VMware vSphere videos for Experts Exchange and received 40 Experts Exchange awards over the last 10 years working with the Experts Exchange community. I am currently the overall #1 point earner in the Hall of Fame at Experts Exchange. I am honoured to have been accepted into the VMware vExpert program since 2011 and more recently made a VMware vExpert Pro for the last 3 years. How do, and welcome back to another episode of Hancock's VMware Half Hour. Sit down, grab a cup of tea, cup of coffee, a beer maybe, because this is probably going to take 30 minutes. And in post edit, I will actually shrink it down to get it to 30 minutes. Because the deployment to today, we're going to do deployment and install VMware vSphere vCenter Server 8 or VCSA 8. We're going to follow exactly the same procedure that we did in the last video that I did on how to deploy and install VMware vCenter Server 7. So I'm going to jump straight in and I'm going to start and I'm going to stop waffling. So the first thing I've done, I've already downloaded the ISO from VMware. I'll put the links in the description for that. I've checked the signatures. So just to confirm, I'm using the MD5 and SHA checksum utility version 2.1, and we've got good signature for MD5 sum, SH1 sum, SH256, and they all match. So I'm going to practice what I preach. Don't assume that the downloads that you get through the internet sometimes are working. Check those signatures. If you've got signatures that are published by the vendor, then check them. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to open up that ISO. I'm going to use Windows Explorer. I'm going to say open. And I'm then going to go to the VCSA UI installer folder. And I'm going to select Win32. And I'm going to click on the installer exe. Now, I have mentioned before about FQDNs. Do I have to remind you in version 8? I will. Please get into the habit of using FQDNs and DNS. It makes things an awful lot easier in the future rather than using IP addresses. So I've already allocated an FQDN and a host name, and I've already allocated an IP address. So the IP address I'm going to be using in this lab is 192.168.182.138. And the host name that I'm going to give our server is vCenter 8A. And I've already created an A record for that in DNS before I've even started. Before I even downloaded the ISO, before I even opened the ISO, I did that pre-work. So I'm done with that. So I'm going to click install. No longer is there an external platform service controller, and we're deploying a brand new vCenter server. We're not doing an upgrade, we're not doing a migration, we are doing a brand new deployment of vCenter Server 8, followed by next. I'm going to accept the license agreement, followed by next. I'm going to enter the FQDN of our host. So I've got two hosts. So I'm going to specify the first host here. So ESXi01, which is up here. And that's actually logged me out through to inactivity. You don't really need to do this, but I'm just going to show you when this actually starts to deploy. When this starts to deploy, it'll actually create the virtual machine on this particular host. I'm just going to do a refresh there. Okay, so we are actually, I've often seen that you can specify the credentials and it will sit there and pause. And if you just do a quick refresh, then you're ready to go. Anyway, so I'm going to go back to the installer. So I've specified my host name. I'm going to specify the root as the username, followed by the password, followed by next. It's going to come back basically and give me a certificate warning that telling me it's untrusted SSL, because this is the VMware SSL certificate that's been generated for the host. And in another video that I'll do later on, we'll show you how to actually change these certificates so that you don't get this untrusted SSL warning anymore. So I'm going to say yes to accept the certificate. It's going to go off and quickly validate. Now, I don't have an awful lot of memory on these Gen 8s. They are 16 gig. That is the maximum. I'm just going to change that to vCenter Server 8A. The reason I'm calling it vCenter Server 8A is because I already have a vCenter Server 8, vCenter 8 in my environment here at the moment, because I've not manipulated and shifted the DNSs around yet. So we'll do that later. But at the moment, I already have a vCenter server, vCenter Server 8. So I'm just going to call this one vCenter Server 8. So this is setting a root password for vCenter Server. And again, make sure that you remember this one. And also ensure that you keep on top of passwords that expire, that catch an awful lot of people out. Okay, so we're going to go with a tiny installation. As you can see there, the memory requirement has increased again for vCenter Server 8. A tiny is now 2 vCPUs and the memory is now 14 gig, which is incredibly tight on a Gen 8. We're not really going to have space to put any more virtual machines on this host at all. And I think it's going to be very tight. 14 gig virtual machine operating on a host which has a total of 16 gig. So we'll see how we get on. Unfortunately, I think if you look back through the forums about the Gen 8s, some people had tried using 16 gig memory modules. Some had success, some didn't. So you are capped at 2 slots and 8 gig each. And by today's standards, really, that sort of 16 gig really is not really an awful lot to play with in a lab, especially if you actually want to start using vSAN later on. Okay, so I'm going to click next. Okay, interesting there. The upload HCLDB failed to replace old HCLDB with new one. Interesting. I have to copy that and we'll Google that later. So we're going to install on the only data store that we have at the moment. So I'm going to click next. So it's actually telling me that we've got insufficient disk space. So that's just enable thin mode. So thick provision requires 579 gigs. So let's go with thin. So FQDN vCenter 8A. What I'll do later on, because obviously that creating a thin disk gets us around the initial problem of it's not going to create a 579 gig disk, which isn't going to fit on our data store. But the problem that is that we've overcommitted, and eventually when vCenter Server wants to grow to 579 gig, it's going to fail because our current data store on that host is not going to accommodate it. So we'll get the installation done, and then later on when we actually present some NFS storage back to these servers, we'll migrate off local onto shared storage, and we'll get around that issue. So the IP address 192.168.182.138. I've called it 138 for vCenter Server 8. Our other vCenter Server 8 is on a different LAN. Our subnet mask 255.255.255.0. Our default gateway is 192.168.182.1. Not that I can type. 182.1. And our DNS servers at the moment are on a different LAN. Can't type. 136.242. 138.50. I put a space in there. Enter a valid IP address. It's actually stating. Let's just delete that. Try again. 192.168.182.1. Okay. I must have typed something weird there that I didn't spot in playback. Later in post, I'll have a little look, see what I did there. It wasn't obvious. My brain is working faster than my mouth, or my mouth is working faster than my brain. Okay, so yep, vCenter VM network, IP4, static IP address, FQDN. That's the IP address that we've allocated, 192.168.182.138, 255.255.250. That's the default gateway. Those are DNS servers, not in this lab, they're in another lab, but we'll change those later, and followed by next. So that's the host, that's the name, tiny default, local DNS, data store, thin. We're going to have to be careful about that because we've over provisioned. We'll sort that out later in a later video, and I'm going to click finish. So we should see in the background here the installer is actually basically talking to the server. It's importing the VApp and it's running. And if we look at host and we look at virtual machines, we now have a single virtual machine, VMware vCenter Server 8A, and our installer is running. So I'm going to let that run. I'm going to bob off and grab a coffee, although I've already had four double espressos this morning, so I really am on a rush. And I'll come back when this is deployed, the first stage, and we'll kick off the second stage. So I'm going to try and waffle, not too much, just tell you the important bits along the way, the bits that may catch you out, and I will be back shortly. Welcome back. Well, that was a slog. Wow, about 50 minutes. Your deployment of vCenter Server 8 will vary based on your host resources, CPU, memory, and also underlying storage. But you may have noticed as it was installing, I was having a little look. As I said to you before, this is a 16 gig host. It doesn't have any more memory than that. We can't put any more memory in it. We set the vCenter server to RAM to 14 gig and 2 vCPUs. But at the moment, really, it doesn't really look like that it was CPU bound or even memory bound. It was only reporting that it was probably using about 8 gig at most, although that has been increasing, obviously, as it's been installing and starting up modules. Anyway, so and in between that as well, I was actually basically fiddling around with my mouse. I'm not quite sure whether or not it's just me that I'm fussy with keyboards and mice, but I have actually moved to a completely different desktop, and I've been struggling with Bluetooth mice. I don't know why. For some strange reason, when I locked the machine, the existing mouse that I was using, for some strange reason, loses its pairing, and I have to repair it again, and it's been driving me nuts. Having to plug a wired mouse back in again to repair it. So I've swapped it out now. That was a Microsoft 8000 laser mouse, which is really, really, really old, but I just love it. So I've now swapped over to one of my daily drivers, which is a Logitech 557 Bluetooth mouse, which I absolutely love. I've got very small hands, and the Logitech 557 for me is ideal. But I have had problems with the Logitech M557 in the past and Bluetooth. Anyway, I'm digressing. I'm talking about mice and not deploying vCenter server. Anyway, so we've got to a point now in stage 2. So we just click continue. And I will speed all this up in post, and we'll get this down to a manageable 30 minutes if we can. So stage 1's completed, and now we're going to move on to stage 2, and I'm going to click next. So I'm going to say synchronize other NTP servers. You've seen me specify these before. 52 141.245.137.54. And I actually like, rather than the vCenter server depend upon the host for its time, I do prefer it to actually reach out to our NTP servers and get the time, just in case there's something wrong with the services on vCenter server. Then VCSA 8, vCenter server 8 can actually basically reach out. For the sake of security, I'm not going to enable SSH access. So I'm going to click next. At this point, I think he's actually going out and just having a little sniff to see whether or not it actually can communicate to 137.52 and 137.54, which are both on, and they're giving out time. I think 52, I think, is a little bit poorly. Okay, so we're going to create a new SSO domain as we've done before. So we're just going to say vSphere local. We're going to stick with the defaults, and single sign-on password. And again, make sure you write this down, although they have made it easier these days to reset it. So we're going to click next. Yeah, we're going to join the VMware Customer Experience Improvement Program. Next, we're going to have a little look at all this information. That is information that's actually taken from stage 1, but it's just worth checking again. So we're going to assign a static IP address. Yes. IP4. Yes. 192.168.182.138. Yes. Subnet mask 24. Yes. Its hostname vCenter 8a-saurus-consultants.co.uk. There is a host record I've already created for that at the very beginning before we even started installation. I'm not going to talk about EQDNs anymore. 192.168.182.1 is the gateway for this LAN. DNS servers 136.242, 138.50, correct. Synchronize the time. SSO vCenter local administrator, and we've opted in, and I'm going to click finish. And it's reminding me, like it has done before in 6.7 and 7, you'll not be able to pause or stop the install from completing once it's started. And we're going to click OK. And it's going to now go off and start configuring and starting services. And with that, really, there's nothing really more for me to say other than you watch it. But again, I'm going to speed this up in post as well, because otherwise it's like watching paint dry. But one of the things I will do, I will sort of kind of, I'll move it over here. And we can actually start to see whether or not that we, I'm just going to do one refresh. And we can actually start to see now that, you know, the RAM has really jumped up now. You know, we're just sort of kind of probably short now of yeah, 13 gig we're actually basically using there. So it's jumped up. CPU has dropped. We're not really using an awful lot of CPU at all. We had a little spike here, but as we're actually starting these services now, then we really are starting to use the memory. And I am wondering whether or not that we will actually start to struggle on this particular host, as we've got 14 gig virtual machine running on a 16 gig host. Host is going to need some memory somewhere, and of course on a 14 gig virtual machine, there's going to be an overhead as well for that memory of a percentage. So it's probably going to be 200 300 meg on top of 14 gig as well. And then we've actually got the host operating system is going to need some memory to run in as well. Anyway, so I'll come back when this completes at 100%, and then we can basically just do a quick login, and we can do a summary. So I'll be back shortly. And welcome back. Okay, I got delayed slightly because I was on another machine googling away, having a look to see whether or not it was actually possible to put 30 gig in these Gen 8s. It was discussed back in 2016, and at the time, there weren't any memory modules available for them at the time when it was discussed. But historically, somebody out there may have done it. So I don't know. I'm going to do a little bit of Googling later and see whether or not that it is possible to get a little bit of extra life in these machines if we can get them uplifted to 32 gig. Some of you may have noticed, the keen-eyed, that when we were doing the ILO work previously, you may have noticed that the CPUs that I'm using in them are not stock, and that's correct. We have quite a few of these Gen 8s knocking around, and they were all originally supplied, I think, with Celeron type processors, and we swapped them all out for E3 1265s and E1220s Xeons. Later on, HP actually released a version of the Gen 8 with a 1220L Xeon. But before that, I think there were two base models. I think there was a Celeron and a non-Celeron, I think. So there were two models initially, and then later on became the Xeon. But you will see that we're using 1265 V2s in them, which have more threads, more cores, give them a little bit more life. And we're actually using, in some of them, we're using stock stock heat sinks. They're passive with just large heat sinks. There's no fan on them. And in some of them, we did manage to get the updated heatsink for them, which were like rocking horse doo-doo, believe you me, when we bought them. Anyway, so our installation has complete. I'm going to click the link, and okay. Obviously, we're going to get this connection is not private because we're using a VMware SSL certificate at present. So I'm going to carry on. I'm going to launch the vSphere client. It's going to ask us for our username and password, which is administrator at vsphere.local, followed by the password that we entered. I'm going to click log in, and hopefully all the services are started. We're not going to get no healthy upstream. We're not going to get no 403 error or any other web client is initializing. Everything looks pucker, as we say. Okay, good. So our vCenter server 8 has been installed correctly. And again, you may notice, as I pointed out in the first vSphere 8 lab that I did using William Lamb's script, kudos to William there, that the we've now got another honey coloured logo banner at the top in dedication to bees. Anyway, so that's all I've got to show you in this particular video. So thanks very much for watching again. Please come back, please follow me. You know, if you want to ask any related questions, then please do. If you've got any questions, or if you actually want to see other types of videos, then, you know, please ask, put some requests in, and we'll see what we can do. So anyway, thanks very much for me. Thanks for watching. Come back again when we'll look at adding our hosts in the lab to vCenter server, and then we'll start presenting some shared storage. Then we will migrate our vCenter server, and then we'll get back to installing some virtual machines, etc. Anyway, so thank you very much again for watching. Thank you and goodbye.